Why was the entire courtyard staring at her boots? The dirt was still clinging to them, scattered like ash. A stocky recruit had just tossed a fistful at her feet, expecting her to flinch, expecting her to look down like any imposter would. But Rachel didn't. She just stood there, shoulders back, chin level, gray-green uniform hanging loose on her frame. No name tag, no insignia, nothing that marked her as one of them. And yet, somehow, the silence that followed her stillness was heavier than the laughter that had been tearing through the training field seconds before. The recruits had gathered like sharks scenting blood. A stranger in their ranks was sport. A wrinkled uniform, boots scuffed, hair tangled by the morning wind, all the ingredients they needed to mock, to test, to humiliate. They didn't know her, didn't want to. To them, she was an easy mark. Beggar, the sergeant had called her, his voice sharp, echoing across the drills. Kitchen duty suits you better. What are you even doing here? Rachel hadn't answered. Not then. Not when a wiry recruit had snickered about her age. Not when another sneered about her empty chest, free of medals. She let them circle, let them spit their words. Her silence unnerved some of them, though they'd never admit it. The way she stood, not tense, not defensive, but ready. It wasn't the stance of someone pretending. But they didn't see it, not yet. Her fingers brushed her sleeve lightly, almost absent, but it meant something. She was remembering, anchoring herself. The drill instructor, Callahan, broke through the noise. His voice cut like gravel dragged across steel. Who let you in here without identification? Rachel turned, her eyes steady, the color of storm clouds before rain. She didn't rush to explain. Instead, she reached into her pocket. The circle tensed. A weapon, some thought, a knife, a flash of rebellion, but all she pulled out was cloth, folded, frayed, faded with years. Callahan snatched it before she could speak, studied the faint emblem stitched into it, then scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear. Nothing but trash. He tossed it to the ground. Rachel didn't look at it. She didn't bend to pick it up. She simply tilted her head, her gaze moving past Callahan, past the recruits, to the horizon. Her silence pressed into them again, like a weight no one could explain. And then she spoke, just 5 words spoken calm, level. Area A command protocol, 8 lines. Callahan blinked. What? You want me to recite it? She asked. No arrogance in her tone, no plea, just the question steady like she was offering him a choice. He smirked. Go ahead. She did. Word for word, no hesitation. Classified operational lines that had been updated in last month's memo. Details only officers with clearance should know. The courtyard fell quiet as her voice carried. Clear. Precise. Like she was reading them from a sheet no one else could see. Lieutenant Harper froze mid-step, clipboard in his hand, his breath catching. That protocol, it was changed last month. Only staff knew. His voice was low, almost to himself, but the closest recruits heard him. Their faces shifted. Confusion, unease. Rachel didn't pause. She finished the final line, then simply said, I wrote it. The silence cracked, whispers, rustling boots, nervous eyes darting. Callahan's smirk faltered. Black Echo. The words hadn't been spoken yet, but the symbol was there. The faint emblem on the cloth, the pin in her sleeve, the scars only some had noticed. Threads of a story that hadn't yet been revealed. But they still mocked. Fake Ellis, the captain with the perfect bun and sharper tongue, spat. She tore the cloth from Rachel's chest, held it high. The stitching's wrong. Her voice was theatrical, feeding the mob. Rachel didn't resist. Her jaw tightened, yes, but she didn't lunge, didn't beg for them to stop. A lunchbox dented, bandages, salt. That's what they found in her bag, the recruits roared. Cooking duty, someone shouted. Rachel's eyes flicked to the box, just for a second, before her hand stilled at her side. The heat pressed down. The courtyard circled her like wolves circling a lone doe, except she wasn't prey, though they didn't understand that yet. She was waiting, waiting for what always came next. The doctor saw it first. Patel, a scar on her wrist, Not random, not messy, deliberate, Z-shaped, surgical, made by hands trained in the darkest corners of their world. His voice faltered when he spoke. Only border operatives, but he was silenced by Colonel Vance's glare. And still she stood still. "Take it off," Ellis ordered. "Your shirt, let's see the truth." The chant rose, cruel, hungry. "Take it off, take it off." Rachel's hands clenched, then released. No words, no resistance. The shirt was pulled, fabric tugged, skin revealed. 3 scars, long and precise, carved down her spine. The crowd stopped breathing. Their laughter died in their throats. The scars weren't wounds. They were symbols, etched truths. And then the general walked in. Not a captain, not a colonel, a general. His boots stopped cold when his eyes found her back. His medals weighed heavy on his chest, but his face drained pale. Slowly, impossibly slowly, he dropped to one knee. "Commander Moore," he whispered. No one else moved, not a word, not a breath. The recruits who had mocked her froze, shame crawling up their throats like bile. Officers shifted uneasily, boots scuffing gravel. The air itself seemed to harden. Rachel didn't turn, didn't acknowledge him. She just lifted her shirt back up, fingers calm, adjusting her collar with the same precision she'd carried through every breath. Her eyes remained on the horizon, ash gray, cold, seeing something none of them could. A storm was gathering. They didn't know it yet. But she did. Because scars like hers weren't for decoration. They were vows carved into flesh. Memories of nights behind enemy lines where no backup came, where silence was the only friend. Black Echo. The name whispered across the field now, fear lacing the syllables. A ghost unit, a myth, a shadow no one wanted to remember. And she was standing in their courtyard. Not as a ghost, but as the proof that some legends breathe. What kind of silence makes soldiers forget how to breathe? That was the silence after the general knelt. The courtyard was frozen, recruits and officers alike staring as if the ground itself had shifted beneath their boots. Nobody knew what to do. They had mocked her, taunted her, stripped her down, and now the highest-ranking officer on the field had lowered himself in recognition. Not respect, not protocol, fear. General Hall's whisper lingered, "Commander Moore." The name rippled through them like an aftershock. Moore. For some, it meant nothing. For others, the ones who remembered briefings and rumors they weren't supposed to hear, the name hit like a blade to the chest. Black Echo wasn't supposed to exist, and yet here she was, standing in the dirt like some stranger dragged out of the past. Rachel didn't bow, didn't blink. She pulled her shirt back over the scars and adjusted the collar. A gesture so ordinary, so quiet, but in that silence it felt like the loudest sound in the world. Hall remained on one knee. His eyes didn't leave her. His face pale, almost reverent, as though he was staring at a ghost made flesh. And still, Rachel gave nothing back. The crowd began to shift. Recruits who had mocked her earlier dropped their gazes, shame prickling at their skin. Some tried to shuffle backward as if distance might erase what they'd said. Others froze completely, caught in the weight of their own cruelty. But not all. Captain Reed stepped forward, red in the face, voice rising like a man drowning and clawing for air. "She's not even on the active roster. Whatever she was before, she's breaking protocol by being here. She's still in violation." The words cracked the silence. Others followed, uncertain but eager to cling to order. "She's not registered," one muttered. "No documents, no mission papers." It was desperation more than duty. They couldn't accept what they'd just seen, couldn't stand the reflection of their own cruelty staring back at them. And Rachel didn't defend herself. She simply reached down, tugged at her boot, and pulled something from inside the sole. A black chip, no bigger than a coin. She held it up between 2 fingers, letting it catch the light. Reed's face drained white. Everyone recognized it. A shutdown chip, military grade, a single insertion into the base's main server and every defense system would drop. Comms dead, towers silent, entire compound blind. And she had been carrying it in her boot. The crowd stiffened. A ripple of fear spread. What kind of imposter carried that? The loudspeakers crackled. A voice thundered across the compound, steady, official, undeniable. Stand at attention. Present now is Lieutenant Rachel Moore, highest-ranking Black Echo operative, 89 consecutive days deployed behind enemy lines. The courtyard snapped like a string pulled too tight. Boots slammed in unison. Salutes rose like a wave. The same recruits who had thrown dirt at her feet now stood rigid, eyes locked forward, spines trembling under the weight of their mistake. Rachel didn't salute back. She stood still, the chip glinting in her hand, her face unreadable. Then the sound came. Distant at first, a thrum, a vibration in the air. Then louder, the unmistakable chop of helicopter blades. Dust rose, gravel scattering as a transport descended onto the training field itself. The recruits flinched as the wind tore at them, but Rachel didn't move. The doors opened. 3 generals stepped out. Not aides, not mid-level brass. Generals. Their uniforms perfect, their eyes locked only on her. They didn't glance at the saluting ranks. They didn't acknowledge the officers. They walked straight toward Rachel, their boots crunching against the gravel. The tallest of them, silver hair, eyes like cold steel, extended his hand. Rachel didn't hesitate. She placed the chip into his palm. He closed his fist around it, gave a single nod. No words, no orders, just a gesture of acknowledgement. The silence in the courtyard deepened. A young recruit at the front dropped his rifle. It clattered to the ground, the sound startling in the hush. He scrambled to pick it up, face red, hands shaking. Rachel's eyes flicked toward him, a glance so brief, but it froze him mid-motion. He couldn't breathe under the weight of it. He had laughed at her. He had jeered. And now he wanted to vanish. But she didn't speak, didn't scold. Her silence was worse than any punishment. The generals turned, moving back to the helicopter with the chip. They didn't explain. They didn't need to. The dust rose again as the blades spun, the machine lifting, shrinking into the sky. And then Rachel moved. Slow, calm. Her old bag slung across her shoulder, its patched canvas bouncing lightly as she walked. The courtyard parted around her. Recruits shifted aside, officers stepping back without a word. She passed through them like water carving stone. Not a sound followed her. But every face was marked. Shame, awe, the sting of realizing they had stood before something extraordinary and spat in its face. She walked to the edge of the field. The base stretched behind her, drills half frozen, whispers rising like smoke. She didn't turn back. She didn't need to. The fallout began immediately. Captain Ellis, who had ripped the patch from her chest, was reassigned before dawn. A desk job far from the front. Her career broken in one afternoon. No announcement was made, but the barracks whispered. The sergeant who called Rachel a beggar disappeared into a closed-door meeting with General Hall. He walked out pale, trembling, and didn't show up at drills the next morning. Recruits who had mocked her tried to bury the evidence online. A few posted jokes, tried to laugh it off. Their posts vanished within hours. Whispers said intelligence flagged them, erased them. Screenshots spread anyway, photos of scars, mentions of Black Echo, blurred faces. By nightfall, those same recruits were ghosts in their own barracks, sponsorships pulled, friends avoiding them, their laughter gone. But Rachel wasn't there to see it. She had walked away, dust at her heels, the weight of silence trailing behind her. Private Larson was the only one who followed, not close, not obvious, just enough to see. She found a photo Rachel had dropped. Old, creased, the edges worn soft by time. A younger Rachel stood in it, surrounded by her team. Faces blurred, almost erased, but the bond was clear. Larson slipped it into her pocket. She didn't chase after Rachel, didn't call out. She simply held the photo, a proof of something larger than herself, something she wanted to believe in. Rachel didn't look back. because for her, looking back meant remembering, and remembering was heavier than any bag she carried. The base returned to its rhythm, drills resumed, orders barked, but every time someone's eyes strayed to the spot where Rachel had stood, the silence returned. Not all scars were visible, and not all orders deserved obedience. Rachel knew that better than anyone. Her scars weren't just wounds. They were survival. They were choices. They were nights spent in places where no soldier should stand alone. Nights when Black Echo walked in shadows so deep that even the military tried to forget them. And she had carried those scars into the sunlight, unflinching. That night recruits whispered in their bunks. Stories rose like campfire tales, half believed, half feared. One swore he'd heard she'd crossed a minefield to save her team. Another muttered about a mission that never made the records. None of them knew the truth, but all of them knew they had seen something real. Rachel didn't need to hear their whispers. Her boots carried her farther down the road, away from the courtyard, away from the shame. She wasn't here for them. She was here for something else. And as she disappeared into the darkness beyond the base lights, her scars carried the weight of what no one else could bear to speak. Why didn't she stop when they called her name? Private Larson had tried. Her voice cracked, soft against the heavy night air, but Rachel kept walking, her boots crunching gravel, her figure shrinking into the dark. No hesitation, no backward glance, just the steady rhythm of someone who had learned long ago that stopping was dangerous. The base faded behind her. The floodlights hummed, guards shifted, voices rose and fell, but Rachel didn't slow. The road stretched ahead, dust trailing from her heels, the weight of her bag pressing into her shoulder like a reminder of everything she still carried. She had left them in silence, but silence was not empty. Silence was memory. Every step away from the base carried her deeper into it. She had told them nothing, not why she was there, not what the chip meant, not what Black Echo had done in those unmarked years. The generals hadn't spoken either. They didn't need to. Their presence alone had been answer enough. But the recruits whispered still. In the barracks, Larson held the photo she'd found, tracing the creases with her thumb. A younger Rachel stared back, surrounded by figures who seemed to dissolve into shadow. There was no laughter in that photo, no smiles, just a unity forged in something too dark for words. Larson couldn't sleep. She replayed the courtyard over and over, the mocking, the chant, the scars, and the way Rachel hadn't broken, not once. She thought of her mother back home, the way she'd endure stares in their small town without bowing her head. Strength wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was the way you refused to bend even when everyone wanted you on your knees. And Rachel had shown them that. But the officers were less comfortable with silence. Behind closed doors, debates raged. Reed argued for protocol, insisting her presence was a violation. Hall remained silent, his eyes haunted, his voice scarce. He had knelt, and once a man kneels in front of the truth, excuses become hollow. Still the questions remained. Why had she come? What had she delivered? And most of all, why now? Rachel didn't ask those questions of herself. She already knew the answers. The chip was never meant to be hers to keep. It was an anchor, a token she'd carried for months longer than planned, a safeguard against betrayal, and it had brought her back here to a place that once had been hers, though no one remembered. The road bent toward a small outpost on the edge of the hills. She knew the way without thinking, her boots finding the grooves of paths she hadn't walked in years. The stars were sharp above, the air cool against her sweat-damp shirt. Her scars itched, they always did at night, as though old wounds remembered what the body tried to forget. At the outpost, a maintenance worker sat on a crate, cigarette glowing faint in the dark. He squinted as Rachel approached. He'd seen her before, that afternoon, standing under the sun while the recruits mocked. He hadn't spoken then, but his instincts had screamed that she wasn't just another stray. Now he nodded once slow. "They don't know who you are." Rachel didn't answer. She lowered her bag to the ground, sat on the edge of the crate opposite him. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was familiar. Soldiers, real ones, didn't need to fill the air. He flicked ash into the dirt. Scars like that don't come from drills. Rachel glanced at him. Her eyes said enough. He didn't ask again. Instead, he leaned back, exhaling smoke into the night. They'll talk about you for years, but not the truth. They'll tell stories. Half will say you're a ghost. The rest will say you're a fraud. He gave a short, humorless chuckle. Either way, you'll be bigger than flesh. Rachel tilted her head, listening to the hum of distant engines. That's fine. It was the only thing she said. He didn't push her, didn't ask why she was there or what the generals had taken from her hand. He had seen enough men and women pass through this base to know when a story was too heavy for questions. Instead, he stubbed the cigarette out and left her alone. Rachel sat there until the horizon bled pale with dawn. Her bag rested at her feet, heavy with nothing anyone else would value, a dented lunchbox, old cloth, scraps of memory. But each piece had weight. Each one carried a story no one at Fort Ramsay deserved to hear. She rose before the sun fully crested and walked again. Behind her, the base stirred with restless energy. The fallout was already reshaping lives. Ellis packed her bags with shaking hands, bitterness clenching her jaw as whispers of her reassignment spread. Reed rehearsed speeches, but no one listened. Hall stayed silent, avoiding questions he couldn't answer. And Larson carried the photo. She tucked it into her uniform pocket, close to her heart, as if the image itself gave her strength. But Rachel's steps carried her farther, into the hills, toward the ruins of a training ground long abandoned. Every soldier had ghosts, hers waited there. The place was overgrown, weeds twisting through broken fencing, rust eating the edges of collapsed barracks. She moved through it with careful steps, like walking through memory. Her fingers brushed the charred wood of a doorframe, her eyes catching the faint outlines of symbols scratched into the wall, initials of soldiers long gone. She paused in one room, the air stale with years of dust. Her breath caught. The floor creaked under her boots. This had been theirs. Black Echo. Their voices still echoed if she let herself hear them, laughter too sharp, silence too heavy, the kind of camaraderie that wasn't warm but binding, forged in places no one else could follow. She closed her eyes, felt the weight of their absence pressing against her chest. Some had never made it back, others had but not whole. And she had returned with scars. Her hands trembled just slightly as she opened the dented lunchbox. Inside, beneath scraps of folded cloth, rested a single photograph, not the one Larson carried. Another, this one clearer, not blurred, faces sharp. Every operative of Black Echo, shoulder to shoulder, their expressions hard, unflinching. Rachel among them, younger, eyes brighter but still shadowed. She touched the edge with her finger. One by one, she whispered their names. The silence after each one hurt more than the last. Her chest tightened. She let the photo fall back into the box and closed it with a snap that echoed too loud in the ruined room. Her scars itched again. She pressed her hand against her spine, grounding herself. She wasn't here to grieve. She was here because something had shifted. The chip was only part of it. Black Echo's name had been spoken aloud for the first time in years, and once a name leaves the shadows, it cannot be pulled back in. That meant something. Danger. Rachel rose, her boots crunching on broken glass, and walked out into the morning light. Far behind her, the base was restless. Recruits drilled harder than ever, the sting of shame driving them. Officers barked louder, their voices edged with unease. And everywhere whispers, about the scars, about the general's salute, about the woman who had walked away without a word. Larson listened, but she didn't join in. She traced the edge of the photo in her pocket and thought of Rachel's silence. Strength didn't always shout. Sometimes it walked away, carrying the weight of everything it could not say. Rachel knew that better than anyone. How do you carry the weight of people who aren't here anymore? Rachel didn't ask the question out loud. She never did. But it followed her, every step through the ruins of the old training ground, every creak of rotting boards under her boots. The ghosts of Black Echo were stitched into her scars, etched into her spine. Some mornings she woke and still felt them walking beside her, silent but present, as though the world had refused to admit they were gone. The photo lay in the dented lunchbox, closed again, but the faces inside wouldn't leave her. They hovered, pressing against her silence until it hurt. She sat on a collapsed wall, the rising sun streaking gold across the cracked concrete, and let herself breathe. Just once, she closed her eyes and let memory take her. The night came back like it always did, sudden, sharp, merciless. Darkness swallowed the forest. Rain hammered leaves. Her team moved like shadows, boots soft in the mud, weapons cradled close. Black Echo, not soldiers in the official sense, not names anyone would ever speak aloud. Operatives built for missions no one else could survive and no one else would admit existed. Rachel was younger then. Her voice still carried hope when she whispered commands, her hands still steady without shaking. They trusted her. They followed her. And then the night broke. Gunfire shredded the silence, bright streaks carving through rain, screams cut short, the forest lit in chaos. Rachel had dragged two men into cover, her own shoulder burning with shrapnel. She had screamed for them to fall back, but falling back wasn't an option. Orders had been clear: no return, no rescue. If compromised, they didn't exist. The scars on her back were born that night, 3 blades, a ritual, yes, but also a reminder. Pain traded for survival, the choice of who carried the story forward. Rachel had walked out of that forest alive. Most of them hadn't. She opened her eyes now, sunlight spilling into the ruins, and her breath came slow. She pressed her hand against her chest, grounding herself again. The past never left, but she had learned to live with it. Still, something had changed. The chip was gone, delivered. Her name had been spoken aloud. The general had knelt. Black Echo wasn't a ghost anymore, not just in whispers, but in daylight. And that meant someone, somewhere, had decided to use her scars again. She rose, adjusting the strap of her bag across her shoulder, and started walking. Back at Fort Ramsay, the officers were restless. Reed barked protocol like a shield, but no one truly listened. Hall sat in his quarters, staring at the floor, his hands clenched in a way that betrayed more fear than command. Rumors spread about the chip, about the helicopter, about what command wanted from Rachel. Larson heard it all. She kept quiet. She carried the photo in her pocket and said nothing. But silence doesn't erase thoughts. She couldn't stop thinking of Rachel's scars, of the way the general's knees had hit dirt. What kind of woman carried that kind of presence? That night Larson crept to the edge of the base. She couldn't explain it, not to herself, not to anyone, but she needed to know where Rachel had gone. She followed the faint trail into the hills, her boots clumsy on rocks, her breath too loud in the dark. She found the ruins by chance, an old training ground half swallowed by weeds and silence. She stepped through the crumbled walls, flashlight beam catching scratches on the stone, letters, names, forgotten history. And then she saw her. Rachel, sitting on the wall, head bowed, the dented lunchbox open at her side. A photo glinted in the weak moonlight. Larson froze. She didn't dare move closer, didn't dare speak. She just watched. Rachel lifted the photo, traced the faces with a finger, whispered something Larson couldn't hear. Her shoulders trembled once, but her face stayed hard. Larson felt guilt like a blade in her chest. She remembered the courtyard, her silence when Rachel had been mocked, her hesitation to speak until it was almost too late. And now, seeing Rachel alone, she wished she'd shouted sooner. She turned to leave before Rachel noticed her, but gravel shifted under her boot. Rachel's head snapped up. Her eyes caught Larson's in the dark. For a moment, silence. The kind of silence that makes your throat close, your heart stumble. Larson swallowed. "I am sorry." Rachel said nothing. Her gaze didn't soften, didn't harden either. It just stayed. Larson's chest tightened. "I should have said something back there, I should have." She stopped. Words felt too small, too late. Rachel closed the lunchbox, slow, deliberate, and stood. She crossed the space between them in 3 steady steps, her boots crunching soft. Larson didn't flinch, but her breath caught. Rachel stopped just close enough that Larson could feel the weight of her presence. She studied the young recruit for a long moment, then reached into her pocket. Her hand came out empty. No words, no gesture, just silence. Larson frowned, confused. Then Rachel spoke, her voice low, steady, as if every syllable weighed something. "Don't apologize with words." Larson blinked, then how? Rachel stepped back, adjusted her bag, and turned away. "You'll know when it matters." She left Larson standing in the ruins, heart pounding, hands trembling. The recruit watched until Rachel disappeared into the dark again. And something inside her shifted. Back at the base, whispers continued. Officers traded rumors. Some swore Rachel had been recalled for a mission. Others muttered about containment, about shutting her down before her scars reminded too many of what had been buried. But none of them truly understood. Rachel wasn't back because she wanted to be. She was back because history doesn't stay buried. Scars itch when storms are coming, and she could feel one building, slow, heavy, inevitable. She walked until dawn broke again, her breath steady, her stride unbroken. Ahead, the horizon promised nothing but distance. Behind, the base stirred with fear and awe. And somewhere between, Rachel carried the weight of the dead. Because scars don't heal when they're carved as reminders. They whisper, they warn. And hers were burning again. Why did the alarm sound if there was no attack? The sirens began just after dusk, a hollow wail that cut through the base and sent recruits scrambling into formation. Boots pounded gravel, officers barked orders, rifles clattered in nervous hands. But there was no smoke on the horizon, no shadow of incoming aircraft, no crack of enemy fire. The alarms weren't for an invasion. They were for something else. Inside the command tent, Reed slammed his palm on the table. "This is reckless. You saw what happened in the courtyard. She walked in here like she owned the place, handed over a chip that could shut down every defense system we have. And you," he glared at Hall, who stood silent at the head of the table, "you knelt." The word cracked the air. It wasn't just an accusation, it was disbelief. Hall didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on the papers spread across the table, not documents, not protocol sheets, but an old classified file with a blacked-out header. Beneath the thick marker lines, one word remained faint, almost erased by time. "Echo." Reed shoved his chair back, packing. "We don't even know if she's still sane. Whatever she was 10 years ago, she's not one of us anymore. If command wants her, fine, but I'm not standing by while she undermines everything we've built here." Captain Ruiz, quiet until now, finally spoke. "She hasn't undermined anything." Reed spun on him. "She humiliated us." "No," Ruiz said softly, "she reminded us." The tent went silent. Hall lifted his gaze, heavy, measured. His voice was low when he finally spoke. "I knelt because I've seen what those scars mean, and if you had, you wouldn't be questioning this." Reed scoffed, but he didn't push further. Outside, recruits whispered among themselves. Some repeated the new stories: Rachel Moore, the ghost of Black Echo, the woman who had walked through fire and never flinched. Others tried to laugh it off, but the laughter rang hollow. Private Larson kept silent. She sat on her bunk, the photo still in her pocket, her eyes distant. She had followed Rachel once, seen her in the ruins, seen the weight she carried. And she couldn't forget Rachel's words: "Don't apologize with words. You'll know when it matters." Larson wondered what that meant. Meanwhile, Rachel had walked farther than anyone expected. She had left the ruins behind, crossed the hills, and stopped where the road forked. One path led to the outpost towns, safe but crowded. The other veered toward wilderness, valleys thick with fog, places where even patrols went missing. She stood at the fork, her bag heavy against her shoulder, the weight of her silence pressing deeper into her chest. Her scars burned, not the skin, the memory. That night in the forest had never left her. The screams, the flashes of fire, the betrayal of knowing no one was coming back for them, and the ritual 3 blades across her back, not just survival but a vow. She had carried it into every mission afterward, and now, years later, those scars were waking her like an alarm. She chose the wilderness. The path narrowed, brush scraping her sleeves, branches breaking under her boots. The world grew quieter here, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that carried danger in it, like the forest itself was watching. Rachel wasn't afraid. Fear had burned out of her years ago, in jungles and deserts where silence meant survival. She simply moved, steady, calm, every step deliberate. Behind her, the base was unraveling. The generals had taken the chip, but questions multiplied instead of answers. What was on it? Why had Rachel carried it so long? And why deliver it now? Reed didn't care about answers. He cared about control. "She's a liability," he barked in another briefing. "We need to track her, contain her, before she becomes a bigger problem." But Hall cut him short with one sentence. "You don't contain a storm." The words unsettled even Ruiz. Because that's what she was, a storm wrapped in silence. Larson couldn't shake it either. She dreamed of the scars, of Rachel's unflinching gaze. She woke with her hands clenched, heart pounding, as though the silence itself was demanding something from her. By the 3rd night, she made a decision. She packed lightly, water, rations, a flashlight, her rifle, and slipped out past the perimeter fence. She wasn't following orders. She wasn't even sure what she was following. But her boots carried her into the hills, toward the same wilderness Rachel had chosen. The forest swallowed her quickly. Shadows stretched, branches clawed at her uniform, and every sound seemed too loud. But she pressed on. Rachel was ahead of her, moving deeper into valleys only Black Echo had once dared to tread. She didn't look back. She didn't slow. And somewhere unseen by either of them, another set of eyes watched. Not recruits, not officers. Others. The wilderness wasn't empty. It never had been. Rachel knew it. That was why her hand brushed the scar on her jaw as she moved, grounding herself, steadying her breath. She could feel it in the way the silence shifted, in the way birds stopped calling, in the faint metallic tang that didn't belong in forest air. She kept walking. Larson, clumsy but determined, stumbled behind, unaware of the shadows that had begun to close in. Back at the base, alarms rose again, this time real. Perimeter sensors tripped, long-range surveillance flickering static. Officers scrambled, unsure whether to fear an external attack or the reawakening of something they thought buried. Reed cursed, blaming Rachel again. "She's drawn them here. Whoever she is, whatever she's carrying, it's dragging us into the fire." Hall didn't argue. He just whispered under his breath, almost too soft to hear, "The fire never left." And in the wilderness, Rachel's eyes sharpened. She could feel the ghosts stirring. Not just the ones in her memory, but the kind that breathe, the kind that move, the kind that wait. She reached into her bag, not for the photo, not for the lunchbox, but for a weapon she hadn't touched in years. Her silence cracked just once, as she muttered into the empty air. "They always come back." What happens when silence becomes the only warning? Larson learned it first. The forest had swallowed her, branches clawing her sleeves, shadows pressing against her skin until every step felt like trespass. She slipped past the perimeter fence with determination, yes, but determination didn't silence the heartbeat pounding too loud in her ears. Every twig snapping underfoot felt like betrayal. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps chasing her. She wasn't built for this, not yet, not like Rachel. But Rachel moved through the wilderness as if it belonged to her. Her stride never faltered, her breath never hitched. Her boots pressed into soil without breaking rhythm, each step deliberate. It wasn't training. Training teaches patterns, rules, rehearsed discipline. This was different. This was instinct, carved into her during missions where one mistake meant silence forever. Larson tried to follow. She trailed far enough to avoid being seen, but close enough to catch glimpses of Rachel through the trees. A silhouette gliding between shadows, gray-green fabric merging with leaves, hair whipping faint in the wind. She looked like part of the forest, not an intruder. Larson stumbled again. She cursed under her breath, steadying her rifle against her shoulder. That was when she noticed it, the silence. Birds had stopped. Insects too. The kind of quiet that makes the air feel heavy wrong. Her pulse spiked. She froze, crouching low, her eyes darting through the brush. Rachel stopped too, ahead of her. Not turning, not signaling, just pausing mid-step, her head tilting like she was listening to something Larson couldn't hear. The silence stretched. Then Rachel moved again, but slower now. Her hand slid down her sleeve, fingers brushing a scar before curling around the grip of a small weapon hidden beneath the loose fabric. Larson's mouth went dry. She raised her rifle, though she wasn't sure what she was aiming at. The shadows moved. At first it looked like nothing, just a trick of light fog curling between branches. Then Larson saw it. Figures. Shapes breaking from the tree line, too many, too quiet. They moved low, deliberate, like predators closing in. Her throat clenched. She wanted to shout, to warn Rachel, but the sound caught. She didn't need to. Rachel already knew. She stepped forward, calm, unhurried, as if she had been waiting for this moment. The first figure lunged from the shadows. Rachel pivoted, not fast, not frantic, but measured. A crack of movement, her elbow striking, the figure collapsing without a cry. Another followed. Rachel shifted again, body low, scarred spine twisting with precision that came from years of survival. Larson's rifle shook in her hands. She'd never seen anything like it. This wasn't training combat. It wasn't sparring drills in the safety of a courtyard. This was something else, something raw. The attackers didn't shout. They didn't bark orders. They moved like shadows, like they belonged to the silence itself. Rachel met them one by one. Her weapon flashed, her strikes controlled, her breathing steady. She didn't waste movement. She didn't chase. She let them come. Larson crouched lower, eyes wide, terrified of firing and giving herself away. She couldn't even tell who they were. No insignia, no colors, just faceless shapes swallowed by the forest. Rachel disarmed one, her hand twisting his wrist until the blade clattered to the dirt. She pressed it back into him, not with rage, but finality. Another scar in the forest that no one would talk about. Larson's stomach turned. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. Then one of the shadows broke from the line and came toward her. Her breath caught, her body froze. The figure was faster than she expected, blade flashing in the dark. She raised her rifle too late, her hands trembling, her chest locking up with panic. But before the blade fell, Rachel was there. Her hand caught the attacker's wrist mid-swing. Her other hand shoved Larson back out of reach. The move was silent, precise. Rachel didn't shout, didn't waste a word. Her eyes locked on Larson for a single second, ash-gray, sharp, unreadable. Then she turned back, twisting the attacker's arm until the silence broke with a muffled cry. It was over in seconds. The last figure melted back into the trees, vanishing as suddenly as they'd come. The forest breathed again, birds called, insects hummed. The world resumed as though nothing had happened. But Larson couldn't breathe. Her hands shook on the rifle, her heart slammed against her ribs. She tried to speak, to say thank you, to ask who those people were, but the words wouldn't come. Rachel crouched, checking the fallen figures with calm efficiency. She didn't linger, didn't gloat. She just ensured they weren't getting back up, then wiped the blade clean on her sleeve. Only then did she turn to Larson. "You shouldn't be here." Her voice was flat, not angry, not surprised, just factual. Larson swallowed. I had to." Rachel cut her off. "No, you had a choice." The silence pressed heavier than the fight had. Larson dropped her gaze, shame burning her cheeks, but she didn't turn back, she didn't retreat. Rachel studied her a moment longer, then sighed, a sound so soft it felt like it carried more weight than words. She motioned for Larson to follow. Not an invitation, a command. They walked deeper into the wilderness, the forest swallowing them again. Larson trailed behind, still shaking, but now with something different pulsing in her chest. Not just fear, not just awe, something heavier, responsibility. Rachel didn't speak as they moved. Her silence wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It was the silence of someone who had carried too much for too long. Larson wanted to ask questions. Who were those people? Why were they here? What had Black Echo done to make enemies like that? But every time she opened her mouth, the words felt small. Instead, she watched. She studied the way Rachel moved, the way her eyes scanned the trees, the way her scars seemed to guide her more than any map. Finally, after hours, Rachel stopped. She crouched beside a stream, filling a dented canteen with water. The reflection in the surface caught her scars, pale lines twisting across her back, and for just a second Larson thought she saw Rachel flinch. Not from pain, from memory. Larson's voice was small when she finally spoke. "How do you carry it?" Rachel didn't look up. "Carry what?" Larson hesitated. The silence, the scars, everything. For the first time, Rachel's eyes softened, just barely. She capped the canteen, stood, and looked at Larson directly. "You don't carry it." Larson frowned. "Then how?" Rachel adjusted the strap of her bag. "You let it carry you." The words hung in the air, heavy, sharp, unforgettable. Larson felt them sink into her chest, deeper than any lecture, any drill sergeant's bark. And then Rachel turned again, walking farther into the wilderness. Larson followed. Behind them, the forest reclaimed its silence, but silence wasn't empty anymore. It was watching, it was waiting. Because the shadows hadn't vanished, they had only withdrawn. And Rachel knew. Storms never end in a single strike. Why would enemies hunt a ghost that no longer exists? Larson couldn't shake the question. She walked behind Rachel, boots crunching softer now, her fear tempered by something else, determination. Hours earlier she had almost died in the forest, blade flashing toward her throat, and Rachel had saved her without hesitation. But Rachel hadn't comforted her, hadn't explained. Just silence. Orders, movement. The forest closed around them again. Thick trees rose like walls, fog twisting low to the ground. Every sound seemed sharper now, every twig, every rustle, every distant animal cry. Larson's eyes darted constantly, her rifle trembling less than before but still unsteady. She wanted to prove she wasn't just baggage trailing behind. Rachel didn't look back. She moved with the same calm as always, her gaze forward, her senses tuned to something Larson couldn't name. Her scars itched again, though she didn't touch them. She didn't need to. They weren't just wounds. They were warnings. The shadows hadn't been random. Rachel knew that. Those figures who had attacked, faceless, wordless, disciplined, they weren't just raiders. They were trained, silent, professional. Not soldiers who fought for medals, but operatives who killed for silence. She had seen movements like that before in jungles years ago, when Black Echo had walked into missions no one else dared take. The question was who? It was why now. Rachel stopped at the edge of a clearing. She raised a hand, signaling Larson without looking back. "Stay low, stay quiet." Larson obeyed instantly. Across the clearing, hidden half in shadow, an old watchtower leaned crooked, half collapsed. Rust streaked its steel, vines curling through its bones, but at its base fresh footprints. Rachel crouched, fingers brushing the soil, eyes narrowing. At least 6. Maybe more. She didn't need to track them farther. The pattern was enough, coordinated, not lost wanderers. Larson crept closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Who are they? Rachel didn't answer right away. She studied the tower, her ash-gray eyes locked on its broken silhouette. Then she finally spoke, voice low, almost carried away by the wind. They're not here for you. They're not here for this base. Larson frowned, then. Rachel's gaze sharpened. They're here for me. The words struck Larson like a blow. Her throat tightened, her hands gripping her rifle harder. Why? Rachel's silence was louder than any explanation. But inside her chest, the truth burned. Black Echo hadn't been forgotten by everyone. Not by the ones they had crossed, not by the enemies they had left behind in smoke and blood. Some wounds never healed. Some scars weren't hers alone, they belonged to the people who wanted her erased. Rachel rose, calm, steady. She motioned Larson to stay close. They moved around the clearing, every step careful, every breath controlled. Halfway across, a sound broke the silence. A cough. Rachel froze. From the shadow of the tower, a figure stumbled out, clutching his side. Blood stained his uniform, not military issue, not official. Dark fabric, unmarked, just like the others. His face was pale, eyes glazed with pain. He saw Rachel, his breath caught. You, he rasped. Rachel said nothing. The man staggered, collapsing to his knees. His hand shook as he reached toward her. They'll never let you go, he gasped. Black Echo doesn't die, it haunts. Then his body went limp, head falling forward, silence reclaiming him. Larson's breath hitched. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but Rachel only crouched, checked his pulse, then rose again, expression unreadable. She turned, started walking. Larson hurried after her, voice trembling. He knew you, he said. Black Echo, what does that mean? Why are they? Rachel stopped so suddenly Larson almost collided into her. She turned, her eyes sharp, cutting through Larson like a blade. Do you really want to know? Larson froze. Her lips parted but no sound came. Rachel stepped closer, her voice low, heavy. Black Echo was never about survival, it was about silence. We went where no one else could. We did what no one else would. And when it was over, we were erased. Larson swallowed hard. Rachel's jaw tightened. I'm not supposed to exist. None of us are. That's why they want me gone. The forest pressed closer, as if listening. Larson's chest ached. She thought of the photos still in her pocket, the faded faces beside Rachel, the weight of them, the cost of scars that marked survival when silence demanded erasure. Before she could speak, a sound split the air. Not gunfire, not voices. A distant boom. Back toward the base. Rachel's head snapped toward the horizon. Her shoulders stiffened. She knew that sound, not an accident, not training, controlled, intentional. The base was under attack. Larson's stomach dropped. The recruits. Rachel was already moving, her stride long, her bag bouncing against her side. She didn't look back. Larson ran to keep up, lungs burning, fear and urgency tangling in her chest. Branches tore at them, roots threatened to trip them, but Rachel never faltered. She moved like the forest bent around her. The boom echoed again, closer now. Then alarms, real ones this time. Sirens crying across the valley, their wails bouncing off the hills. By the time they reached the ridge, smoke curled into the sky. The base, visible through gaps in the trees, writhed with chaos, barracks burning, soldiers scrambling, shadows moving among them. Larson's throat closed. They're inside. Rachel crouched low, her eyes scanning the scene, her breath steady. She saw the pattern immediately, the same movements, the same silence. The attackers weren't raiders. They weren't enemies from outside borders. They were the same shadows that had followed her here. And now they were inside the base. Larson gripped her rifle tighter, panic clawing at her chest. "We have to help them." Rachel's voice cut her off, calm, cold, final. "No, first we find why." Larson's eyes widened. "They're dying down there." Rachel's gaze snapped to her, sharp enough to stop her breath. "If you don't understand why, you can't stop it. You'll just be another body." Larson's stomach twisted. The words felt cruel, but the truth in Rachel's tone made her chest ache. Rachel turned back to the smoke, scars burning beneath her shirt. Black Echo wasn't supposed to exist. But now it had come back to haunt them all. Why did the fire look so familiar? Rachel stood on the ridge, smoke curling upward from Fort Ramsay, alarms howling into the night. Below, recruits scrambled in chaos, officers shouting orders no one could hear. The shadows moved among them, not as soldiers but as predators. Silent, precise. The same figures that had stalked the wilderness now struck the heart of the base. Larson's breath came fast beside her, fear sharp in her throat. "We have to go down there." Rachel didn't move. Her eyes narrowed, studying the patterns of attack. Every movement was deliberate, coordinated. They weren't here to destroy, not fully, not yet. "They're not here for the base," Rachel said finally. Her voice was low, steady, cutting through the wail of sirens. Larson turned to her, confusion lacing her fear. "Then what?" Rachel's jaw tightened. "They're here for me." The words hung heavy, undeniable. She rose, adjusting the strap of her bag across her shoulder. Her scars burned beneath her shirt, each one a warning carved years ago. Black Echo had been silence made flesh, and silence didn't vanish. It waited. And now it had come calling. Rachel started down the slope. Larson followed, her rifle tight against her chest, her boots stumbling over rocks but refusing to stop. She didn't care if Rachel wanted her there or not. She wasn't turning back. They reached the perimeter as the fire spread. Barracks cracked with flame, recruits coughed in the smoke, rifles raised at shadows they couldn't pin down. Officers barked, but their authority splintered in the chaos. Reed stood in the courtyard, his face red, his voice hoarse from shouting. "Hold your lines, hold your—" He stopped when he saw her. Rachel emerging from the smoke, her eyes ash-gray and steady. For a moment the entire field seemed to pause. Soldiers gaped, fear and awe mixing in their faces. The woman they had mocked, the one they had tried to break, was walking straight into the fire they couldn't contain. Rachel didn't acknowledge them. She didn't salute, didn't shout, didn't issue orders. She just moved forward, her silence heavier than any command. Larson trailed her, coughing, eyes wide at the carnage. She wanted to shout encouragement, to do something to steady the others, but Rachel's stillness held them more than words ever could. From the shadows the attackers emerged again, blades glinting, rifles low, silent, faceless. They surrounded her like wolves circling prey. But Rachel didn't stop. One stepped forward, lowering his hood. His face was pale, scarred across the cheek, eyes cold as stone. He spoke with a rasp, his voice carrying through the smoke. "You should have stayed dead." Larson froze. Rachel's face didn't change. She simply tilted her head, her voice calm, almost soft. "You've been chasing ghosts." The man sneered. "Not ghosts, loose ends." The silence tightened. The recruits around the courtyard gripped their weapons, unsure if they were watching a battle or something older, deeper, beyond their comprehension. Rachel reached for her sleeve, pulling free the small blade hidden there. Her grip was steady, her stance unyielding. The man stepped closer. Black Echo was supposed to vanish, erased, forgotten. You walked out when no one else did. And now, his eyes flicked to the soldiers watching. Now they'll see what happens when silence breaks. He lunged. Rachel moved like a storm breaking through calm. The blade flashed, her body twisting with a precision born from years of surviving missions meant to erase her. The fight wasn't loud. No shouts. No wasted motion. Just silence and steel colliding in the smoke. Larson raised her rifle, hands shaking, but Rachel's eyes caught hers mid-strike. One look, one command without words. Hold. So Larson did. The courtyard watched in frozen awe as Rachel dismantled the silence itself. Each strike was deliberate, each movement a reminder. She wasn't fighting to win. She was fighting to endure, to show them what endurance looked like. The man fell finally, his blade clattering against the stones, his breath rattling as he hit the dirt. Rachel stood over him, her chest rising steady, her scars burning beneath her shirt. The silence that followed was heavier than the fight itself. The other shadows retreated, vanishing into the smoke, not defeated, not destroyed, but scattered. Rachel didn't chase. She simply lowered her blade, wiped it clean, and turned back to the soldiers staring at her. Their faces were pale, shame thick in their eyes. They had mocked her, jeered her, called her a beggar, and now they stood in the smoke, saved not by her words, not by her forgiveness, but by the silence she carried like armor. Larson stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. She told me not to apologize with words. She said we'd know when it mattered. Her rifle hung at her side, but her spine was straight, her chin lifted. She looked at Rachel, then at the others. This is when it matters. The recruits shifted, their shame breaking, their fear giving way to something else, respect. Not loud, not shouted, but quiet, steady. Rachel's lips curved into the faintest smirk. Not pride, not victory, just recognition. She adjusted her collar, her bag, and turned away. She didn't wait for applause. She didn't expect forgiveness. She simply walked, her boots crunching on the stones, her silhouette fading into the smoke. The General Hall stepped forward then, his voice low, almost reverent. Sometimes, he whispered, as if speaking to himself more than the soldiers, dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The words lingered, heavy, echoing across the courtyard. Rachel didn't look back. The fire behind her still burned, the base still reeled, the scars on her back still ached, but she walked into the horizon like she always had, unflinching, silent, steady. Her story wasn't one of medals or parades. It wasn't one of glory. It was one of scars. And scars don't lie.